thank you guys so much for taking the time to do this. We really appreciate it. I know that we value marriages at LCC, and you guys have invested so much time and energy into helping so many in this church. So thank you guys first for doing that. What kind of stems fuels your passion for marriages here?
Yeah, and I think for me and Mary, part of it is that we have a healthy marriage. And so we don't have a perfect marriage, and I never try to portray that. Even when I'm in conversations, I usually reference the difficult times that we've had in difficult seasons. But by the vast majority of our marriage, by and large, we have had a really healthy marriage and for 15 years. And so for me, it is the greatest blessing next to salvation in my life. And I really do mean that. So everything in my life stems from a healthy marriage. Like my hope and optimism toward the future is because I have this solid marriage. Just my joy and the reason I can pursue things is because of the healthy marriage. And so we're so excited about our marriage. When we deal with people who don't have that, our hearts are toward them because we want them to have that. And we believe it's possible in all marriages. And so a few years ago, we went on sabbatical, and it was just the greatest season of our marriage and our family. We were gone for 6 weeks, completely disconnected from everyone else for the most part. I realized what true health looked like. I got mentally healthy. We were relationally healthy. I just felt really relaxed and refreshed. And God really put it on my heart, wholeness. And so we started just having those discussions. And because you're the director of that, you know this personally. But when I came back, I sat down and said, hey, I really want to focus on wholeness. Wholeness of finances, wholeness of physical body, wholeness relationally, and specifically marriages. And so we started to make that a passion of ours, of how can we take what God has so blessed us with and give that into other marriages. And so that's really where the passion began.
Mm-hmm. And to go along with that, marriage is hard. It takes a lot of work and it takes a lot of purpose. And that's a theme that I will talk about a lot today, is just like anything else in life, if you want to be healthy physically, you have to be purposed to take the steps to be healthy physically. Marriage is the same exact way. It's not just going to miraculously happen. It is something that takes purpose, decisions, and working towards health in a marriage. And so I think that's one of the big things for me, is I want to encourage people to not think that it's just something you attain by doing nothing to get there. It takes very practical and hardworking steps in order to have a marriage that's healthy.
Yeah, awesome. In your experiences with your own marriage, but also in marriage mentoring, what are some of the foundational elements that you would say are kind of key to having a healthy marriage?
Yeah, the number one foundation in marriage is probably not intuitive. So if you were to ask the average person in our culture and say, what is your goal in marriage? The average person would say, I want a happy marriage. And that sounds good, and that sounds like a good goal, but honestly it's not. Because if your goal is happiness, you by nature have to be selfish. You have to pursue what you want. And honestly, not to be just kind of flip about it, but if your goal in marriage is to be happy, that might mean another spouse, a different spouse. Because you're thinking, I can't be happy with this person, so I pursue that. So when we talk about marriage, and this is the foundation that everyone has to understand, and will be the foundation of every answer we give today, is the foundation of a healthy marriage is that you want to pursue Jesus and honor Jesus. And that sounds like a very church thing to do, but you have to understand what I mean by that, because if you don't understand that, then everything we say today will not make sense. So if you go to a secular counselor about marriage and talk to them, they're going to quickly tell you what you have to do is protect yourself. You have to create a system that protects you, defends you, works toward that. And that's not what Jesus says. So in Scripture, the main passage in the New Testament is Ephesians 5. It says, Paul is encouraging the church in Ephesus, and he says, you have to submit one to another. So that's like Ephesians 5:21. You submit one to another, and then he turns and says, wives to your husbands, like you need to submit to your husbands. And he says, here's the way that you do it. So here's the standard, is you submit to your husbands the same way that you submit to Christ. Well, what does Christ call us to do? All of us. To die to ourselves, right? I mean, this is, Dietrich Bonhoeffer has a great quote. He says, the call of Christ is the call to come and die. And so we have to die to ourselves. So he says, women, if you want to really be a good wife, you have to die to yourselves. So, a lot of guys love that passage. That's right. Then he turns right to guys and says, same thing to you. If you want to be a husband, love your wife the same way that Christ loved the church, giving himself up for her. So he says, men, do you want to be a good husband? You have to die to yourselves. So again, it begins in this culture, submit one to another, wives to your husbands, husbands to your wives, die to yourselves. So if your passion and the focus and foundation of your marriage is, I really want to honor Jesus and I want to die to myself so that my spouse can live, if that becomes the passion of it, then you will experience a healthy marriage, and the result will then be a happy marriage. So for Mary and me, what we've learned in our marriage, initially, we were nice to each other. We had a really healthy dating relationship. We were nice to each other, but we stepped into marriage still selfish. And when we learned that my passion has to be Mary to take care of Mary, and her passion has to be Matthew to take care of me, when we made that transition years ago, that's when our marriage became really healthy, and I would say even happier. So I've never been unhappy in my marriage, but now I look back and I think, man, I was an awful husband. And I don't mean that to be like a joke. Like, Mary would probably say amen to that. Can I get an amen?
Yes.
She said yes, all quietly. But you get what I'm saying, so.
All I have to add is you have to die to yourself.
Yeah.
Exactly what he said. We talked about this all the time in our marriage mentoring group that we do. I think people are tired of me saying it, but it is just die to yourself so you can serve your spouse. And you were saying it years into our marriage, we figured that out. Well, guess what? Last week, I was still figuring that out. I have to die to myself
Amen.
to be a spouse to Matt. And that's difficult. And for those of you who are single, you're going, great, that sounds like an awful life to get married and have to die to yourself. But what the beauty is that God teaches you about yourself, and there's the fulfillment of marriage and fulfillment of life when you choose to die to yourself to serve somebody else.
Yeah, it really is the greatest representation of our relationship with God. It's the greatest. So marriage is difficult. It is requiring to die, as Mary is saying, but it is a gift from God for us to become more like Christ. So if I can learn to die to myself to really meet Mary's needs, I really become a much healthier person. So as I learn to die to myself to make Mary happy, honestly, I'm a better friend. I'm a better pastor because I'm learning to die to myself. So it is a gift from God for us to figure out what really is the real us. Because you know this because you work with me. I can fake it. I can fake happiness. I can treat you nice and not even like you, right? I do like you, Brandon, but you know what I'm saying. But I can fake it, but it's hard to fake when 24/7 with someone. So God uses it as a way to always bring to the surface the junk of our lives so that we address it. And when we do, we become healthier people. So it's work, but it's a gift from God.
Just about weekly, we get a number of different people who walk into our offices on different spectrums of marriage, different seasons of marriage. So what really is LCC's strategy for helping marriages, regardless of where somebody comes in?
Yeah, our strategy is in development. So when we came back from sabbatical, we decided that we wanted to mentor couples. And so we started, 2 years ago, we mentored 10 to 12 couples for about 9 months. And that was by far the most beneficial ministry thing that I've done in years. So we just loved it. We saw the fruit of it. Marriages became healthier. And then the next year we did the same thing. So this past year we just wrapped up another season of that, another 10, 12 couples. And it was just so rewarding. We loved it. And it was a couple other couples that partnered with us in that. And but as a whole for the ministry, we are trying to right now develop a ministry that's effective for someone that is on any place in that spectrum. So someone that comes into our office that's in absolute crisis, all the way to the person who has a really healthy marriage, but they want to maintain that. So they want to be proactive in that. And so we're developing it. What it looks like now is people need to schedule a meeting with one of our pastors, and they come in preferably as a couple, and we can do the kind of get to know you meeting and figure out what is a strategy for you. So on the high surface level, if your marriage is really healthy, I would encourage you to come to the simulcast that we host just about once a year. Do things like that. Make sure you're paying attention during the service, as I oftentimes give references about marriage and stuff. But if you're in any type of struggles or crisis, meet with us, and then we create a strategy to help that. And for some, that is intensive counseling. Some of it's one-on-one with a counselor. Some it's as a couple. Some it's to go away on a retreat with a counselor. And we have a lot of different strategies, but we're still in the development phase of that. But even this past week, I had meetings with Ron and Skip about this, where we're going to, in the next 6 months, really solidify what our marriage ministry looks like, and so that hopefully we can put that into writing and give it to people in our congregation to say, wherever you are on this, we're here to meet with you. But I would say, even as we're developing it, come have a conversation with us. Right now, it's very relational, kind of grassroots in that sense, but we will do whatever's necessary to help marriages. So we refer a ton of people to counseling, even give financial support if they can't afford it. It's one of our largest payments out of our benevolence fund each month, but we are very, very purposed about marriage.
Let's just kind of get it out there. I know the big topic in even culture and even in churches is sex. So let's talk about that up front. So as far as culture is concerned, there's a lot of viewing of that the church views sex as this like offensive thing that we can't do. So what kind of, out of the context of marriage we see that, but then also within the context of marriage relationship, healthy relationship, how does that look? How does sex look for everyone?
Yeah. Mary? No, I'm just kidding. I know she doesn't want me to do this.
Brandon?
Yeah, Brandon.
Done.
Give
I'm
us your
out.
thoughts. So here's the seriousness. If you're part of our church, you know I am not embarrassed at all to talk about sex. So I give a funny story for you that are part of our church. You remember this. So 4 years ago, I did a series on sex, and it was like 3 or 4 weeks, and it was by far the most watched sermon I've ever done. So we would just see on website, it was just clicking more and more. People were watching, people were sharing it. But it really showed just that need for good teaching on that. But when I did that series, one of the things I said was at the end of it, I concluded a message, the very first one, and I said, so here's the challenge to you as married couples. You need to have sex for 14 straight days. And it was so funny, people's reaction. They were like, so I had all these men coming up to me, high-fiving me afterwards, saying, best sermon ever, and all these wives going, are you crazy? And even I had my grandma, she even sent me a message and said, Grandpa and I listen to your sermons, and I'm like, oh, Grandma, don't do this, and don't. But I love her sense of humor and stuff. But the point of it was,
I was going to say, but also in that message, it wasn't just have sex. It was what do you have to do in order to resolve conflict so that you can have sex?
Right.
What do you have to do to address issues, to communicate so that you can have
Right.
sex? It wasn't just that act. So I think that's important, though, is that sometimes you're saying, like, guys are high-fiving you.
yeah.
But the women are saying, okay, yeah, well, this is what we're going to do in order to get to that
Can you
point.
just see the dynamic of every marriage the same way? The guy is going, yeah. And she's like, no. Let's address what leads into that. So,
Right.
but that is, so anyway, so when we go back to the Bible, so the reputation in the church world is a church is anti-sex, God is anti-sex. Nothing could be more further from the truth. God is more pro-sex than any person who has ever lived. God is the creator of sex. It was his idea. So as we jokingly say, Adam and Eve didn't figure it out, and God walked around the corner and was like, what are you doing? Stop that. It was something that God created. He gave us desire for it. Even before we ever experienced sex, there's sexual desire. It was the way that we procreate, knowing we want kids. He made it pleasurable. So God is for sex. In the Bible, there was one restrictive command initially, don't eat of the tree, but there was one proactive command, and that was be fruitful and multiply. So from the very beginning, God's pro-sex, but God designed sex to be the most powerful, intimate connection between a man and a woman, and God has said in the scriptures that is reserved strictly for marriage. So in our culture, we've tried to take something that was designed for marriage between one man and one woman in the context of marriage, and we've tried to take it and use it outside of that, which is very dangerous, because something that was designed to connect two people into one in an intimacy that is really supernatural, our culture has now turned it into simply a physical act. So what happens is men and women think love is enough. It's not. The standard is marriage. And so in our culture, people will turn it to love or just for fun. And it becomes very damaging, because then later on, when they get married, something that was one time supernatural and powerful has been distorted and oftentimes even wounded. And we deal with tons in marriage counseling. Their lack of intimacy goes back to their really promiscuous lifestyle before marriage. And so we as a church stress sexual morality, the context of one man, one woman, in the context of marriage. This is the only God-ordained, blessed way of sexuality. So we stress that not because we want to limit fun, and that's not what God wants. It's that we really are pro-sex, but we want you to experience the best out of sex, which is only for marriage. And Paul says it, I think, the most powerful way. Paul says, all other sins, so 100% of the other sins you commit are outside of your body, but he who sins sexually sins against his own body. What Paul is saying is sex sins are worse in the sense that they damage you. And so it's not the unpardonable sin, but it is a damaging sin. And so Scripture tells us to flee from that. So God is not anti-sex, church is not anti-sex, but we are pro-sex in the context of marriage.
Now, within that relationship, if there are, I guess, not necessarily issues, but conflicts within the couples, maybe one spouse desires it more than the other, how's the best way to communicate that or even overcome those obstacles sometimes?
Yeah, let me expound on it if you want to jump in on this. Typically, this is not universal, but typically it's the husband who wants more sex and the wife who, I wouldn't say necessarily wants less sex, but yeah, wants less sex. Okay, I mean, just for the sake of this conversation. But there's a lot that goes into it, and this is what Mary was alluding to. So a guy can physically have sex on command and multiple times a day. Like, it's not, and I apologize if this is shocking to you, but it just is. Okay, so Brandon and I are just going to have a conversation about this. But it is, so the guy is physically able to have sex. A woman really needs that emotional and relational connection, a lot that leads into that intimacy. So what happens typically is a guy wants sex as an entryway into connection with his wife. A wife wants relational connection into an entryway to sex. And so it's still a need, and it has to be acknowledged that it is a legitimate need. So what happens in a marriage is oftentimes the guy's need, or whoever wants sex more, that need is ridiculed because that's all you ever think about, right? So in our marriage, it's just hypothetically here, Mary really needs relational connections and conversation. So as a guy, if I said my need is I need more sex, if Mary were to say to me, that's all you ever think about, we would never flip that and say, if she goes, hey, I want to have a conversation with you, and I go, man, that's all you ever think about, do you want to talk? All of us would go, no, that's a legit need. Every marriage needs a conversation. So we never make fun of relational needs, as in communication, quality time, because we know, yeah, that's legit. But at times we can diminish a sexual desire, and we'll say, like, well, that's like perverted. I've actually met with people that have said, my husband's a pervert, and I'm thinking they're going to tell me something really bizarre, and they're like, he wants sex multiple times a week. And I'm like, congratulations, you married a man. That's what you got there. And so I think what we have to do in that is have a conversation of what can we do to connect intimately. So in a marriage, if I'm a guy that just expects I'm not gonna relationally connect to you at all during the day, the only time I ever show affection is sexual affection. I'm smacking your bottom, I'm groping and that kind of thing. I'm not giving you just hugs, and I'm not giving you attention, and I'm not having conversations, but I expect you just simply to turn it on at night because I want to have sex. That's selfish. And so we need to have a conversation where she acknowledges this is a legit need that I have, but I have to acknowledge you have legit needs too. Let's figure out how we can meet each other's needs so that we can connect on this very powerful and gift that God has given us in sexuality. So, you want to add anything to that?
No, did it well.
Done. What role should in-laws have in marriage?
Ooh, tricky. I think that as far as that goes, that you have to find the balance of your marriage, and that you have to figure out what works for you as a couple, and then you need to be able to have boundaries with parents and in-laws, but at the same time show love and respect to them. That's very important. So that kind of varies with each family and how much each family spends, whether it's where you live close in proximity to your in-laws, or relationally, talking on the phone, whatever that may be. You just have to be able to find that balance. But here's the thing, as a spouse, you have to protect your spouse from in-laws and parents. So it is your responsibility to have those hard conversations. We discuss this, and we feel like it's your responsibility to have those hard conversations with if it's my parents that are causing trouble, I would be the one to have that difficult conversation with them and set boundaries, and vice versa. Now, we're in a very blessed situation where both of our in-laws we get along with great. They set their own boundaries. We don't have to say much to them at all about boundaries. But we do know that this can be a very difficult situation, and in-laws have the capability, hopefully not meaning to, but to really wound one of you in your marriage. So you just have to be very proactive to protect your spouse and be willing to have those tough conversations with your in-laws.
Yeah, one thing I would add, and Mary alluded to it, but is I think the standard is you only allow in-laws into your marriage as much as both of you agree. Mm-hmm. So some families, like I see some in-law connection in a family, and sometimes I think in my mind that family would drive me nuts, okay, because of how I'm wired, but it works so well for them. And they're just like, man, because both of them, they love that connection. I mean, where parents come over every single day, and that's their dynamic. So if that works for you, bless you. I mean, that's awesome, but you have to have a conversation. So if I were to say to Mary that I need some space between your parents, like she's saying, then we decide that, and then with an honoring approach needs to have that conversation. So she needs to defend me, I need to defend her, but we do it in a way that honors, because it is a difficult transition. You're in charge of this being for 18, 19, 20 years of their life, 22 years or longer, and then now they're married, and it's hard for them to transition. So in love, give them those boundaries, and I think even sometimes the boundaries are probably a little bit stricter initially, and then it becomes healthier. So like when you first get married, I don't need mom and dad's advice on every little thing, because we have to figure this out together. But once we get a good rhythm in our marriage, like I know now we're quickly to go to our parents, quick to them. Like I would, without hesitation, go to her dad for advice and say, Dad, could you answer this? And because I don't have that insecurity as a new husband, that I don't feel threatened anymore. I don't know if I ever did, but so.
Now, I know finances is often a conversation within marriages and in all households. So, as far as if you have the tension where there is the saver and the spender, I know that's kind of the dynamic in our relationship a lot of times, is there was the saver and then there's the spender. So, how do you kind of communicate that difference, and how do you find that good balance between the two?
I don't even
We
want to
don't
hear
know what
this.
you're talking about.
Well, how many of you are savers? How many of you are spenders? Okay, so you're probably married to each other. And okay, so I'm spender, Mary's saver. Do you want to do this? Do you want me to?
Yeah, this has taken us a while to get the hang of and figure out what is a good rhythm for us and what is the balance. And we've made a lot of mistakes, and we've gone through some different programs to help us. And I think it just took us. For us, it took time to get on the same page, to both get to the same place where now we have a mutual agreement about what we think we want to do with our budget and how we handle finances. And I would encourage, if you feel like you're in a tough situation or feel like this is a battle for you, if you're both willing to do something together to get some mentoring and get some help. For us, we took Financial Peace University here at the church years ago, and that was a good step. But even that didn't get us both on the same page. It took several years after that before now we are eventually there. But I think I had to give grace to Matt, and he had to give grace to me. And that is the balance of just about every issue of marriage, is some give and take. I had to loosen the reins a little bit on what I thought I wanted to do with the finances, and he had to become a little bit more, follow a budget a little bit more.
Yeah, and I think that's, so it's typically the tension is with the spender. So you're saver, right? Yeah. So you and Mary have the same heart, and
We
but
felt each other's
pain. Yeah,
for
you guys I
years.
know have talked about it before and stuff, and me and Megan are like high-fiving each other, spend away. And but what we had, I think the spender, it's their responsibility to check themselves, and they have to submit to the budget. But as Mary says, then there's grace there. So in our relationship, I've shared this before, like money just does not have a hold on me. So I'm not afraid of money. I'm not afraid of losing money. If I don't have money, I'm not stressing out. It's not my security. It's just, I've never been wired that way. But Mary is naturally wired that way. She's a budget person. She likes to have knowledge and stuff. And she doesn't need a lot of money, but she just wants to know where money is going. So in our marriage, the rhythm for us is I had value in spending money in relational context. So like I wanted to eat out periodically. I wanted to go and do date nights and stuff. So some of the stuff we'll talk about in a moment. Mary was like, okay, I'm all for that, but I need to see where that is in our budget. So in order for me to get what I wanted and for her to get what she wanted, we had to have a budget. So I would say every marriage, the sooner the better, you have to get a budget. I don't think that's optional for anyone. If you want to remove financial stress from your marriage, have a budget. So Mary and I, for the first 8 years of our marriage, maybe 10 years of our marriage, the number one stress in our marriage was a financial discussion, by far. So if we were going to be frustrated, it was around finances. The last few years, I don't know that we've had a single argument about finances. It's just not a stress, but we have a budget. So in our relationship, I'll just go through this kind of quickly. In our relationship, I said, babe, I want to be able to eat out sometime. And in Mary's mind, that's a waste of money. So in her natural response is that's a waste of money, but I'm like, I just like to eat out. I like to go on dates. I like to go see movies and have this. So what we figured out in our relationship, we have a slush fund is what we referred to it. And we have, so it's every week a certain amount of money goes into this other account. We have our own debit card for that account. It's not a ton of money, but it's just enough money. So all of our other things are budgeted. And then when we are discussing doing something fun, doing some eating out, we just go right to that account, how much money is in that account. And if we have it, Mr. Budget says yes. If we don't have it, Mr. Budget says no. It's not, I'm not mad at her. She's not mad at me. It's just simply a financial thing. And when that money builds up, so that when we go out, if I say, hey, let's go on a date, and we go out and we're spending what could be a lot of money, 40, 50 bucks, on a date or something, there's not stress for us because it's in that account. And so she and Grace now says she would not probably naturally spend that money that way, but it's a good rhythm for our relationship. So.
In terms of just, we talked about tensions within that relationship, not only financially, but just in other arguments and things that come up. If somebody has, say you guys have seen a little bit of change in one another, a little bit of flex in one another, say if those changes aren't happening, you become frustrated within that relationship, how do you begin to kind of process through that? Or what's kind of your next step for that?
Let's take that.
I think that's a big issue in marriage, is that each one of us has an issue that we struggle with, and it seems like that seems to be the repeated action that we do. And it becomes very difficult to forgive the person when you've seen that repetitive behavior over and over again, and it builds. So when you have an argument over that issue, it's not that one time, it's all the times that have led up to that. And I think that's one of the biggest struggles we see in marriage, and we've faced it ourselves. And it is a hard answer, and I don't know if I have the very solution for you, but what we've come to know is that it's forgiveness and grace. And it's that heart that says, I'm going to forgive you again, and I'm going to give you grace again, and we're going to continue to work at this and continue to want to change our behavior. Now, not everybody wants to change their behavior, and they keep making that same mistake over and over again. And that is a very, very challenging place to be. And again, there's not an easy answer for this, except that what God has called us to do, just like what you were talking about at the beginning about dying to ourselves, is saying, I am going to choose to forgive you again, and I am going to choose to give you grace, because that's what Jesus does for me on a daily basis. Not easy to say, very much not easy to do at all, but that really is the discussion that we have a lot with each other, is I'm going to forgive you again for this and give you grace.
Yeah, and that's what I'm talking about. Mary's answer right there makes absolutely no sense if you don't have the context of I'm pursuing Jesus and I want to honor Jesus. Because in the world, they would just say, that makes no sense. Like, set a boundary, protect yourself, and say, at this point, no more. So if you're not going to change, I'm out. And we just don't believe that's what God's called us to. So in a marriage, it's, I want to honor Jesus. And so it is repetitive forgiveness. It is repetitive grace to the extreme, because that's what God gives us. God at no point ever says to us, that's it. You've done it 100 times. That's 365 days in a row, you're out, and so that's the context that we have, is that we have to keep giving grace over and over, and where it becomes difficult, which it does quickly in the process, we go to God and say, God, help me in this, and God does. And so as we die to ourselves, that's the process that we just have to give grace and show forgiveness. And then I would say in marriage, another just helps us in perspective, is the areas that we often expect is the areas that we do naturally. I say this often, and it usually resonates with people. So if I want Mary to do something, there's a good chance I do that naturally. So like in the love language book that I take our marriage mentoring group through, each person has a different love language, which is things they do naturally. So I am a gift giver. I am affectionate. Mary is a acts of service. What's the other one that you have? Do you remember?
Quality time.
Quality time. And so Mary would naturally clean the house. I mean, she just we have a really well put together home. And she would do that thinking in her mind, she is showing me love, I love Mary, couldn't care less if my house is clean. Just not how I'm wired. I want her to come and sit down next to me and rub my back. Here, I should do it on her, not you probably, Brandon. Rub my back, and I want her to connect that way. So I'm frustrated that she's not doing that. She's frustrated that I'm sitting on the couch, because she does it naturally, I do mine naturally. So we have to get out of that, of realizing, that's not her natural bent, but we can have conversations. And I work hard now to be proactive, look around my house, what would Mary do, clean stuff that way. She walked into a room, if I'm sitting there, she'll sit down next to me and put her hand on my shoulder and talk to me. And it really means a lot to me that way. So it's grace, but it's also just understanding that we expect things that we do naturally.
And I think, too, I just want to add one more thing, is get help, too. If there is an issue or issues that continue to be come to the surface in your marriage, do not be afraid to get help and to ask somebody, a pastor. You had talked about calling in, schedule an appointment with a pastor, get some counseling. That's okay. That's good. We need tools to help us, to teach us how to be better spouses. And if you're in that rhythm and you can't get out of it, of the arguments and the same issues over and over again, do not be afraid to get help. I just really encourage you to do that.
Mm-hmm. And help brings that accountability into it.
Right.
So even, I think in a sermon less than a month ago, sometime in the last month, I referenced a time recently in our marriage where I was on my high horse. I was complaining that Mary didn't change in some area. Mary knocked me off that high horse by saying, well, you haven't changed either. And we were both right. So since that moment, we've both looked at our marriage and made changes in order to meet that need. So I can't just, as a husband, so if you're both Christians and you're both pursuing, I can't just go, well, hey, keep giving me grace, baby. That's not the right response. I have to say, I need to change. So for me, I wasn't doing this list of things that she had created for me, and I had all these excuses why. So for me now, I realize Friday, which used to be simply in my mind a relational day, I now go, I have to bust my butt for that first good chunk of that day, getting this list done, because that really connects to Mary. So I had to make a change in my life to do that will allow us then to have that quality time in the evening and date night and things like that.
I think some couples fear fighting, in terms of working things out. And so how how much is fighting naturally a part of relationships or working through things? You know, is there a level of where fighting is dangerous? You know, or is there a level where you can fight fair, or how does that typically work in relationships?
Yeah, so fighting fair is a phraseology. I don't think I coined that phrase, but I use that phrase all the time. And fighting fair, in my mind, is you have to create rules that govern how you fight. So I will actually sit down with couples, and I have my own list that I've created for our marriage mentoring group. But if I'm sitting out with a couple, I'll say, you need to come up with a list of rules that's going to govern when you fight. So let's talk about Mary and me. So we're not going to, our rules are we're not going to raise our voices. And that's not so much Mary, she's not a yeller, but I either can raise my voice or I have a yelling tone. I've talked about that before where Mary goes, you might not be raising your voice, but your tone is yelling. And so we talk about tone. We talk about words that we're going to say. So we're not going to bring up past problems. So we don't fight dirty. So it's not, well, you did this 6 years ago, and we're bringing that and throwing it out there because that can wound someone. We're not doing sneak attacks in our fighting. So we're talking about taking out the garbage. Can you guys believe I forgot to take out the garbage this week? Of all weeks to do it again, I forgot to do it this week on Monday. I was like, I'm speaking on marriage. And she gave me grace. But if we're talking about the garbage, I'm not going to be like, yeah, well, and then throw something else into that mix. That can wound someone. I'm not going to use words that hurt. So you have to create guidelines to protect how to argue, because there's always going to be, and the term fighting, obviously we can use discussion, you can use argument and stuff. I don't think it's ever healthy to get really amped up. I mean, because you get amped up to really illustrate a point. But once you're there at this level, and you're consistent at this level, it no longer illustrates a point. So you have to go to this level to illustrate a point. Now you're slamming doors. Now you're leaving the house. Now you're, becoming abusive. I mean, it can go to an extreme. And so I think your goal is to keep it calm and to have a discussion. So that's where Mary and I are now in our marriage. And we're not perfect in this, but now in our marriage, we're able to have a conversation where we aren't fighting dirty. Where even now, this is huge for our marriage, where we can go, I hear exactly what you're saying. You hear what I'm saying. We're going to agree to disagree. We would have never done that years ago. It would have been like, no, we'll be here, for 48 hours in a row until we figure this out. And so, but I think, so I think if you're consistently fighting, there's probably something deeper going on. But if you're addressing issues, that's healthy until there aren't issues until the next season. Then there'll be some more issues.
Mm-hmm.
Does that sound right?
Right. I don't think you ever arrive where you're never going to have any issues in your marriage. We're human beings. We have issues we have to discuss with one another. So I think it's early on, and if it's not early on for you right now, figuring out what are those healthy ways to communicate with one another so that you can continue to address a lifetime of issues that are going to come to the surface.
Because the season's constantly changing. So when Mary and I first got married, that's a unique season. And then we had moved to Lancaster. That's a new season. Then we had a kid. That's a new season. And then every time you add a new body to the mix. So, it's a new season. Now we have 4 kids. And so you're going to have new issues. And so you have to learn that rhythm of communication. And another thing I would say is, and I say this often when I'm doing counseling with couples, is when you're arguing or fighting, the goal, and everyone needs to hear me on this, the goal is not to be right. That's the danger. That's my personality. I want to argue until one of us proves right. The goal is connection. The goal is that we're going to talk until we figure out what's right for us. So there's give and take in that. There has to be, I'll just say this. If you never, ever in an argument say, oh, you're right, then you're wrong, okay? Like, no one is 100% right all the time. You think you are, but you should have frequent times in a discussion where you're going, oh, okay, yeah, I see your perspective. You're right. Oh, okay, you're right. I messed up on that. I'm sorry. And I'll tell you, when someone does that in an argument, it just diffuses it immediately. So that when Mary is like, you're right. I mean, there are times almost like I think she's messing with me. Like, what do you mean I'm right? You know what I'm talking about? Where you're like you're already kind of amped up, so you think, where do I go from this? You just said I'm right. And you're like, okay, all right. Want to make out? And, sorry. Had to do it. Did you hear her? She said, you just had to do it. I did.
We're going to move on. As far as you mentioned kids, how do you fight healthy in front of kids? How do you, if that comes up, say you're in the car, how do you communicate that? How do you establish that time?
I think it's very healthy for your kids to see you have disagreements and to see you in a healthy way be able to have a discussion about that and come to a solution. I don't think it's very healthy for kids to see you having a super intense argument with one another where maybe you're very passionate about what you're discussing. I think at that time it is better to do that behind closed doors, send the kids to play, whatever it is that you have to do. Because you want your children to learn healthy communication skills. You want them to learn how to be able to communicate with one another as siblings, but also as they get older and enter a dating relationship. But in the same sense, you want to protect them from some of the things that you might have to discuss. So I think that is a balance. It's one you have to learn in your marriage and your family, where you can do both things.
Yeah, and I think after you argue, especially if you go closed doors, your kids know what's going on. Oftentimes, so you're kind of fired up. Hey, mommy and dad are talking now. Go to your room. We shut the door. Kind of intense. I think they need to later on see that you're okay. So like when you come out of that room, you're friendly with each other. You're talking. They realize mom and dad aren't mad at each other still. They work through something. So they need to see the aftermath too, in a good way.
On that level, how do you guys continue to protect your marriage? What do you do to have fun? How do you continue to just stay healthy in that regard, especially with 4 kids and busy lives and a lead pastor role? And how do you stay healthy? How do you date continually?
Let me do protection, and why don't you do fun side of it? So in protection is I'm going to be more at risk than she would necessarily being a stay-at-home mom. Not that there's no risk there. But so in our marriage, some of the general protections we have is we have each other's passwords for everything. And I at no point would ever be offended if Mary took my phone, opened it up, and read anything on there. Looked through my email, text messages, my Facebook account. She has total access to my computer, my phone, my iPad, just all of that. I also, and vice versa, so I could look at her phone and check stuff. And I don't ever meet with women privately, ever. And so if someone needs to have a meeting with me, my assistant Sherry will sit in on it, or another staff member. I don't have ongoing conversation with text messages or emails with women. And that's actually a church policy, so I know you honor that too. And so we really protect ourselves that way. If a woman keeps reaching out to me, I'll defer her to Mary or to someone else. And I've even had times in the past where I've just told people, you got to quit contacting me. I'm not going to be that relational support to you. I'm a man and I'm married, and I'm just not going to be that. And so we protect ourselves that way. I don't have a lot of lost time, so if I'm every single day, if I'm leaving work, I call Mary. She doesn't do that because she distrusts me. I do it honestly just to say, hey, do you want me to pick up anything from the store? But there's not a lot of lost time in my schedule, so she will know for the most part where I am all day long. And so we protect ourselves that way. And then on top of that, we're proactive in our protection in that we really work hard to maintain the health of our marriage by doing fun stuff, and I'll let you allude to that.
Yes, we, from a early point in our marriage, realized we need that connection time. We need that quality time together. I put up a little bit more fight about that because I could always find other things to do. And as far as a date night goes, financially, as he was talking about, I said, we don't have money to go on a date or have a babysitter. So we had to be creative in what it was that we did. And just at different seasons of life, our fun has looked different. So when we've had infants, little kids, where we can't leave the house as much, I know Matt shared this before, we will do, one of us would put the kids down for bed, and the other one of us would go get takeout, and then we'd come, and once the kids are asleep, we would have food and watch a movie together or something like that. So we were essentially dating without leaving the house, and that's what worked for us at that time. And Matt or I would text each other throughout the day, hey, do you want to do a date tonight? And we both knew what that meant. We weren't leaving, but that's what we were going to do. And now we're in a season where we have more family in the area, and we're able to have some babysitters. We have a little bit more money for babysitters. So we are very purposed to set money aside and set time aside so that we can have fun. And just like I was saying at the beginning, everything takes purpose in a marriage. And if you're purposed about spending quality time together, you have to be creative at times, but it's really important to make those times so that you can be with your spouse.
Yeah, and even now, one of our values, so every single night, Mary and I, at 9 o'clock, so without giving all the details, because I've shared this before, but Mary would be, by nature, would put the kids down and think now's the perfect time to get all the other work done around the house. So she would go and do that. I used to be frustrated because I wanted to connect with her relationally. So she's around the house cleaning, so I'd go to my room and start working on church stuff. So she's mad I'm sitting upstairs working on church stuff. I'm mad that she's not connecting with me. So the rhythm of our marriage is every single night now, we put the kids down together. We kind of help each other get the stuff done around the house. And then at 9 o'clock every single night, we come together and watch one TV show together. We'll pause that show frequently. We'll have conversations about the day. But we've made it a priority that we absolutely have to have personal connection every single day. Because if not, I by nature, if I don't get that, I withdraw. It's counterintuitive, I know, but if I don't connect with Mary, then I withdraw from Mary. And I would get frustrated, and she would be frustrated with me. So every single night, I mean, we rarely miss this unless I'm traveling or I'm going out with friends, which is not super frequent. We do that every single night. And that just keeps us centered. Every single night, no matter what's going on, we're coming back together. And we're going to talk, hang out, and then that obviously just lends itself toward all other types of connections with each other.
Great tips. Now, Matthew, I know you wanted to share some final thoughts and prayer, so.
Yeah. So I just want to pray over the marriages, but I want to offer this invitation. We are still in the process of figuring out what exactly our marriage ministry looks like, but I would just give you this invitation. If you are at all struggling in your marriage or you need some insight, please do not try to do it alone. Please come and schedule a meeting with one of our pastors. We would love to sit down with you and figure out a system to help you because we are really passionate about marriages. We think it's going to be the health of it's going to be what saves our community is healthy marriages with healthy children. And so we want to partner with you. So if you're trying to go it alone, don't come and talk with us. It won't impact our relationship. We won't think less of you. It's nothing to be embarrassed about. We want to partner with you. But I would love to right now, the honor of just praying over all the marriages and even the singles in here that one day want to be married. God, we thank you that you've given us the gift of marriage. We know it's difficult. It's the reason you've used the imagery in Scripture of dying to ourselves, but we know it's possible to have a God-honoring marriage. It's possible to have a marriage that is happy and healthy, but we need your help. And so I'm asking right now that you will supernaturally touch all the marriages in this room. Many of them have a lot of wounds and past frustration and hurts. I pray that you will soften their hearts, that you will heal the wounds of their hearts, and that you will allow them to see that there is hope. God, I pray that you will allow them to have the wisdom of what to say and when to say it, the timing of it. And I pray that as their hearts are softened, that their love will be rekindled and that they will pursue each other with love and with self-sacrifice. And Lord, I pray for all the singles that are here that desire to be married someday. Help them now to die to themselves. Help them to learn that rhythm. Help them to protect themselves sexually so that when they get married, that can be the gift that you intended it to be. God, you're so good. Thank you for all your blessings. And we pray this in your powerful and precious name.